Have you ever felt homesick for a place you have never visited? Have you ever seen an ancient temple, heard an old melody, or looked across an unfamiliar landscape and suddenly felt a sadness that made no sense, as if some part of you remembered what your mind could not? You do not know the place, you do not know the people, and yet something inside you whispers, "I know this." Welcome to the Soul's Unexplained Longing, a Vedic-inspired audiobook exploring why we sometimes miss places, times, people, and even lives we cannot consciously remember. Perhaps the answer lies in imagination, emotion, samskaras, or the deeper mystery of rebirth. Stay until Chapter 7, because the most important question may not be where this longing came from. It may be what it is trying to awaken in your life now. Chapter 1. When homesickness appears for a place you have never seen, there is a strange kind of longing that begins without memory. You see an ancient river, a quiet temple, a misty forest path, or a village beneath old trees, and suddenly something inside you reacts as if you are not seeing it for the first time. The mind says, "I have never been there," but the heart whispers, "Why does this feel like home?" For some people, it is only a gentle feeling. For others, it can be powerful enough to bring tears, sadness, peace, or a sense of missing something they cannot name. This is what makes unexplained longing so mysterious. There is no clear memory, yet the emotion feels real. Vedic-inspired wisdom gives us one possible way to understand this through samskaras, deep impressions created by experience, emotion, action, and repetition. Within traditions that accept rebirth, some believe such impressions may continue even when the full memory does not. But that does not mean every familiar place is proof of a past life. There is another possibility that may be even more important. Perhaps you are not missing the place itself. Perhaps you are missing what the place represents. A river may represent peace. A temple may represent sacredness. A forest may represent freedom. A small ancient village may represent simplicity, belonging, and a slower way of living. If your present life feels noisy, rushed, disconnected, or empty, then seeing a place that represents the opposite can awaken something deep inside you. The place becomes a mirror. It shows you what your life may be missing. This is why the better question is not only, "Have I been there before?" Ask instead, "What do I feel when I see this place?" Do you feel peaceful, safe, free, connected? Then perhaps that feeling is the real clue. Maybe you do not miss an ancient river. Maybe you miss stillness. Maybe you do not miss an old temple. Maybe you miss meaning. Maybe you do not miss another lifetime. Maybe you miss a version of yourself that felt more whole. That realization changes everything, because now the longing is no longer only about the past. It becomes guidance for the present. If you long for peace, create more silence. If you long for nature, return to it. If you long for sacredness, make space for it. If you long for belonging, build deeper connections. The life you imagine may be showing you what your current life needs. This is where you must be careful not to romanticize the unknown. A place can feel perfect precisely because you never had to live its ordinary difficulties. The heart can turn another time or place into a dream simply because the present feels heavy. So keep the mystery, but keep your wisdom too. You do not need to say, "I definitely lived there." You can simply say, "Something about this place awakens something important in me." That is enough. Because perhaps the deepest question is not whether the place remembers you. It is whether the feeling it awakens is trying to remind you of something. Maybe peace, maybe simplicity, maybe devotion, maybe a life lived with greater meaning. And perhaps this is the first golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing. Sometimes you think you are homesick for another place, but what you are really homesick for is a different way of being alive. So the next time an unfamiliar landscape makes your heart ache, do not ask only, "Where have I seen this before?" Ask, "What is this place showing me that my present life has forgotten?" Chapter 2. Why certain times in history can feel like you belonged there. Sometimes the longing is not for a place, it is for a time. You see an ancient temple lit by oil lamps, people walking beside a sacred river, old rituals, traditional clothing, simple homes, or a slower way of life, and something inside you reacts more deeply than curiosity. You do not just admire it, you feel as if you miss it. This can be confusing because how can you miss a time you never consciously lived through? Within a Vedic-inspired view, one possible explanation is again connected to samskaras, impressions that remain even when the full story is no longer available to the conscious mind. Within traditions that accept rebirth, some may wonder whether a deep attraction to another era could reflect older impressions. But there is another possibility that may be even more important. Perhaps you do not miss the historical period itself. Perhaps you miss what you believe that period contained. More silence, more sacredness, more connection with nature, more time with family, less noise, less speed, less pressure to constantly prove yourself. The past can become powerful because it seems to hold everything the present has lost. This is why an ancient scene can make someone unexpectedly emotional. The old temple is not only a building, it can symbolize devotion. The river is not only water, it can symbolize rhythm and peace. The small village is not only a place, it can symbolize community. The heart may be reacting to qualities, not dates. That is an important distinction, because if you believe, I belonged in another age, you may spend your life wishing you had been born somewhere else. But if you realize, I am longing for more meaning, simplicity, and connection, then the longing becomes useful. Now you know what your present life needs. This does not mean the feeling is false. It means the feeling may be pointing towards something deeper. Imagine you feel strangely connected to ancient Vedic life. You see sages beneath widespread trees, lotus ponds, quiet riverbanks, sacred fires, and temples surrounded by nature, and you immediately feel calm. Ask yourself why. Maybe your current life is filled with screens, traffic, deadlines, and constant stimulation. Then perhaps the ancient scene is not only reminding you of another time, it is showing you how exhausted you are by this one. The same thing can happen with old music. A melody from a culture or period you barely know can make you feel sad, peaceful, or strangely homesick. You may ask, why does this sound feel so familiar? Perhaps there is an older impression, or perhaps the music expresses something your present life rarely gives you permission to feel. Slowness, grief, beauty, stillness. This is why unexplained longing should not be dismissed, but it should also not be romanticized. Every historical period contained hardship. Ancient life was not automatically peaceful. People still experienced loss, illness, conflict, hunger, uncertainty, and fear. The mind can create a perfect past because it only sees the beautiful parts. That is why wisdom asks you to separate the symbol from the fantasy. You may not truly want to live in another century. You may want to recover something that century represents to you. This is where the longing becomes a guide. If you miss sacredness, create sacred time. If you miss simplicity, remove unnecessary complexity. If you miss community, strengthen your relationships. If you miss nature, spend more time outside. If you miss silence, protect moments where no one is demanding your attention. The past becomes useful when it helps you improve the present. This is also where the Vedic idea of Dharma becomes important. Your life is not asking you to become someone from another age. It is asking you to live consciously in the age you were actually born into. You may love ancient wisdom without rejecting modern life. You can bring timeless values into your present choices. That may be the real bridge between the past and now. Perhaps the reason another era feels familiar is not because you are supposed to escape back into it. Perhaps it reminds you of values your life still needs. This is the deeper question. When you imagine another time, what exactly are you longing for? The answer may be peace, belonging, devotion, purpose, a slower rhythm, a simpler identity. Once you know the answer, the longing stops being only mysterious. It becomes practical. And perhaps this is the second golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing. Sometimes you do not miss another time. You miss something timeless that your present life has forgotten. So when an ancient world makes your heart ache, do not ask only, "Did I belong there once?" Ask something more powerful. What did that world seem to understand that I need to remember now? Chapter 3. When you miss someone you cannot remember. Sometimes the longing has no place attached to it. No temple, no river, no ancient village, no forgotten road. Only a feeling that someone is missing. You may be surrounded by people who care about you, living an ordinary life, and still experience sudden moments when your heart feels as if it is waiting for someone you cannot name. There is no clear face, no memory, no story, only an absence that feels strangely personal, and that can be one of the most difficult kinds of longing to understand. How can you miss someone you do not remember? Within Vedic-inspired traditions, some people may connect this feeling with samskaras left by powerful relationships. If consciousness carries impressions beyond ordinary memory, then perhaps a bond could leave behind an emotional trace even when the identity connected to it is forgotten. But again, the feeling alone is not proof of a previous life relationship. There may be another truth hidden inside it. Perhaps you are not missing a particular person. Perhaps you are missing a particular kind of connection. Maybe you long to be understood without constantly explaining yourself. Maybe you long to feel safe enough to lower your defenses. Maybe you want someone who does not make love feel like a competition, a chase, or a test. The heart can turn these unmet needs into the feeling that someone specific is absent. You think, there must be someone I am supposed to find. But perhaps the deeper question is, what am I actually hoping this unknown person would give me? Peace, belonging, recognition, devotion, emotional safety? The answer can reveal more than trying to imagine their face. This becomes especially powerful when the longing appears during loneliness. You may begin picturing an unknown person who would finally make everything feel complete. And because the person exists only in imagination, they can become perfect. They never misunderstand you, never disappoint you, never arrive at the wrong time. Real people cannot compete with an ideal person who has no flaws. This is why unexplained longing requires wisdom. A spiritual idea should not make you absent from real relationships. Even if you believe there may be old relational impressions within consciousness, this life still asks you to meet the people in front of you as they are. Not as replacements, not as echoes, as themselves. There is also another possibility. Sometimes the person you feel you are missing is actually connected to a part of yourself that feels absent. Perhaps you imagine someone who would make you feel alive because you have forgotten how to create aliveness in your own life. You imagine someone who would make you feel worthy because your self-worth has become dependent on being chosen. You imagine someone who would finally bring peace because you have never learned how to create peace internally. Then the unknown person becomes a symbol, not of someone missing from the world, but of something missing within your current way of living. This can sound less romantic, but it is much more powerful, because now you do not have to wait. You can begin building what you thought only another person could bring. You can become more emotionally honest, build healthier relationships, strengthen self-respect, learn to receive love without chasing it. And something strange may happen. The longing changes. It may not disappear completely, but it becomes less desperate. You stop feeling as though one unknown person holds the key to your entire life. This is where non-attachment becomes important. Non-attachment does not mean you stop wanting love. It means love no longer becomes something you must possess in order to feel complete. You can desire deep connection without turning desire into suffering. And perhaps this is why some people feel unexplained longing most intensely before important relationships enter their lives. Not because a specific person is magically being sent toward them, but because their emotional world is becoming more aware of what it truly needs. The longing clarifies the heart. But clarity is different from prophecy. Do not assume that the next person who feels familiar is automatically the answer. Familiarity can come from many sources: attraction, attachment patterns, shared values, old wounds, emotional chemistry, perhaps even deeper impressions, depending on your spiritual beliefs. Time must still reveal character. This is crucial. Someone can feel ancient and still be unhealthy for you. Someone can feel familiar and still be wrong for your present life. Mystery should never replace discernment. The deepest connection should be able to survive reality. Respect, consistency, honesty, freedom. These matter more than how mystical the first feeling was. Perhaps this is one reason unexplained longing exists. It teaches you to recognize the difference between longing for love and longing to be rescued by love. Those are not the same thing. Healthy love joins your life. Rescue fantasy is asked to become your life. If you keep feeling that someone is missing, ask whether you are waiting for a relationship to begin living fully. Have you postponed joy, travel, purpose, creativity, peace? Do you think everything will finally start when the right person arrives? If so, the longing may be asking for a different response. Live now, build now, grow now. If meaningful love comes, let it meet a person who already has a life, not someone standing emotionally at an empty doorway waiting to be completed. This does not erase the mystery. Perhaps there really are bonds that feel older than explanation. Perhaps certain people touch something deep immediately. But the greatest purpose of such a connection would not be to make you dependent. It would make you more conscious, more truthful, more capable of love. And perhaps this is the third golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing. Sometimes the person you think you are missing is actually the feeling you have not yet learned how to create in your own life. So when that strange absence returns and your heart says, "Someone should be here," do not rush to search for a face. Ask instead, what kind of love am I really longing for? And how much of that love have I learned to live, give, and receive here? Because maybe the mystery is not only who you once loved. Maybe it is whether you are ready to love differently now. Chapter 4. The difference between soul memory and present life emptiness. There comes a point where unexplained longing must be examined very carefully, because not every feeling that seems ancient is necessarily coming from another life. Sometimes the heart says, "I belong somewhere else." But the deeper truth may be, "I do not feel fulfilled here." Sometimes you imagine another place, another era, or another person because your present life feels too empty, too noisy, too disconnected, or too far from the person you want to be. This does not make the longing false. It makes it important, because the feeling may be revealing something you have been avoiding. Perhaps you say, "I miss a simpler life," but maybe what you really mean is, "My current life has become too complicated." Perhaps you say, "I feel connected to another age," but maybe what you are longing for is more meaning, more silence, more nature, or more community. Perhaps you say, "I feel as though someone from another life is missing," but maybe your present relationships are not giving you the depth, safety, or emotional honesty you need. This is where spiritual curiosity must be balanced with self-awareness. Within a Vedic-inspired framework, Samskaras can help explain why certain feelings seem deeper than ordinary memory. But Samskaras are not only mysterious traces from the distant past. They can also be formed right here, through the experiences, habits, disappointments, desires, and emotional patterns of this life. That means the longing may have more than one layer. Maybe there is an older impression. Maybe there is also a present wound. Maybe both are true. But the part you can work with is the part that is alive now. This is why one of the most powerful questions you can ask is, what is missing from my life that this longing keeps trying to replace? That question can be uncomfortable, because sometimes the answer is not mystical. Sometimes it is loneliness. Sometimes it is boredom. Sometimes it is lack of purpose. Sometimes it is the feeling that your life no longer reflects who you are becoming. And when the present feels empty, the mind can make the unknown past look beautiful. Another life becomes peaceful. Another century becomes sacred. Another relationship becomes perfect. But the unknown is easy to idealize because it never has to disappoint you. This is where longing can become escape. You begin thinking about where you might have belonged before, instead of asking why you do not feel fully alive now. You imagine another home instead of creating more warmth in the one you have. You wait for a soul connection instead of learning how to build deeper relationships with real people. You romanticize another time instead of bringing more sacredness into this one. And slowly, the mystery becomes a place to hide. That is where you have to be careful. Spirituality should not make you more absent from your present life. It should make you more awake inside it. If a belief about another life helps you become kinder, more conscious, more peaceful, then it is serving growth. But if it makes you reject this life, avoid responsibility, or wait endlessly for something unknown to rescue you, then the longing may be controlling you instead of guiding you. This is where discernment becomes essential. Ask yourself, when this longing appears, does it give me clarity, or does it make me want to disappear from my present reality? Does it inspire me to live better, or does it make me believe that my real life has not started yet? Those questions reveal a lot, because the goal is not to destroy the longing. The goal is to understand what kind of longing it is. Maybe it is spiritual recognition, maybe it is emotional hunger, maybe it is both. But whatever its origin, it should eventually lead you toward a more conscious life. Suppose you keep imagining a peaceful home beside a river. You feel sure that somewhere, somehow, you belong to a place like that. Perhaps you did, but now ask a more practical question. What does that image contain? Silence, nature, space, peace. Maybe you do not need to find the exact river. Maybe you need to create more of those qualities where you are. This is the difference between longing and wisdom. Longing says, I wish I could go back. Wisdom asks, what can I bring forward? That one shift changes everything. The same applies to relationships. If you feel that you are missing someone you cannot remember, perhaps there is an older bond behind that feeling. But perhaps the longing is also showing you that you need deeper connection now. Then the answer is not to spend years waiting for a mysterious person to appear. The answer is to become more capable of honesty, trust, vulnerability, and healthy love. If someone meaningful enters your life later, you will be ready to meet them as they are, not as the solution to your emptiness. This is one of the most important lessons of this audiobook. A spiritual explanation should never become an excuse to avoid growth. If you feel empty, ask what needs to be built. If you feel disconnected, ask what needs to be restored. If you feel homesick for another world, ask what this world is missing for you. This is where the mystery begins to turn into direction. Perhaps you have spent years saying, something is missing. Maybe now the better question is, what am I not creating? That question returns some power to you, because you cannot control whether a past life can be remembered. You cannot force a mysterious person to appear. You cannot return to another century, but you can change how you live now. You can create ritual, silence, meaning, connection. You can stop treating this life like a waiting room. That may be one of the biggest dangers of unexplained longing, believing that your real home, your real love, or your real life exists somewhere else. But what if this life is not the interruption? What if this life is the opportunity? Within a Vedic-inspired view, even if consciousness has traveled through many experiences, the present embodiment still matters because this is where present action occurs. This is where Dharma is lived. This is where choices are made. This is where karma is shaped. So even if something inside you remembers another place, another time, or another relationship, the memory should not pull you away from the life in front of you. It should teach you how to live this one better. Perhaps that is the fourth golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing. Not every feeling of, "I belong somewhere else," is telling you to leave. Sometimes it is telling you that something inside your present life needs to change. And maybe the deepest question is not, where did this longing come from? Maybe it is, what is this longing showing me about the life I am living now? Chapter 5, Samskaras. When the story disappears, but the impression remains. There are some feelings that seem older than the life you can remember. A certain place makes your chest tighten. A certain melody makes you unexpectedly emotional. A particular kind of separation frightens you more than it seems it should. You feel drawn toward a way of life you have never lived, or toward a symbol you cannot explain. And this is where the idea of samskaras becomes especially powerful. In a Vedic-inspired understanding, a samskara is like an impression left within consciousness by experience, emotion, action, and repetition. Not every impression remains as a clear memory. Sometimes the event disappears, but the tendency remains. The story is gone, but the feeling survives. Think about how this already happens in ordinary life. You may forget the exact words someone said to you years ago, but still feel nervous around people who speak in the same tone. You may not remember every difficult moment from childhood, but still carry the habit of expecting rejection. You may forget how a fear began, yet the fear itself remains. The mind does not always preserve everything as a complete story. Sometimes it preserves the imprint. This is why unexplained longing can feel so strange. You may not remember the home. You may not remember the person. You may not remember the place, but something inside you reacts as though it remembers the feeling connected to them. Within traditions that accept rebirth, this leads to a deeper possibility. Perhaps some impressions may continue even when the conscious personality begins again without the old biography. That does not mean every unexplained attraction is proof of a previous life. It means the idea offers one possible lens for understanding why some reactions feel deeper than the events you can trace. Perhaps what survives is not a name. Perhaps it is a pattern, not a face, but a longing. Not a house, but the feeling of belonging. Not a specific loss, but the fear of losing again. This is where samskaras become more interesting than ordinary memory, because a memory tells you what happened. A samskara may show you what keeps happening. Suppose you have always been drawn toward ancient rivers, quiet temples, and places of solitude. Maybe that is simply personal taste. Maybe those images symbolize something your present life lacks, or, within a rebirth framework, perhaps they touch impressions you cannot consciously identify. But the most important question remains the same. What does that attraction make you do now? Does it make you seek peace? Does it make you withdraw from life? Does it inspire devotion? Does it make you romanticize another existence so much that you become dissatisfied with this one? Because an impression matters through its effect. This is the practical side of samskaras. A deep impression is not only something you carry, it can become something that carries you. It shapes choices, preferences, reactions, relationships. And if you do not notice it, you may keep repeating its pattern without understanding why. This is why two people can experience the same situation very differently. One person is left alone for a day and feels peaceful. Another feels abandoned. One person moves to a new city and feels excitement. Another feels a strange terror that seems far larger than the situation. One person sees an ancient temple and simply admires it. Another feels tears rising. The outer event is similar. The inner impression is different. This is what makes samskaras so important. They help explain why the same world does not create the same response in everyone. We do not meet life as blank minds. We meet it through layers of impression. Some are recent, some are old, some we understand, some we do not. And within spiritual traditions that accept rebirth, some may be imagined as older than this present identity. But here is the part that matters most. You do not need to know exactly when an impression began in order to begin understanding its effect. This is where people sometimes become stuck. They feel an unexplained longing and immediately want to recover the entire story. Who was I? Where did I live? Who did I love? How did it end? But perhaps the full story is not available for a reason. Maybe the lesson does not require the story. Maybe it only requires awareness of the pattern. If you keep fearing abandonment, perhaps the task is to build security. If you keep longing for sacredness, perhaps the task is to create sacred space. If you keep feeling drawn towards simplicity, perhaps the task is to simplify. The impression points. You still have to live. This is why Chapter 5 should not become an invitation to escape into imagined histories. It should become an invitation to notice what your inner world keeps repeating. Samskaras can shape attraction too. You may feel instantly comfortable around certain kinds of people or instantly uneasy. Sometimes that comes from present life conditioning, sometimes from personality, sometimes from unconscious association, and some spiritual traditions may interpret especially powerful recognition through the lens of older impressions. But again, the feeling is only the beginning. What matters is discernment. An instant sense of familiarity does not make someone trustworthy. A strong attraction does not make them destined. An old feeling connection does not erase the need for boundaries. This is important because samskaras can create both beautiful and painful patterns. You can feel drawn toward something because it is healthy or because it is familiar. Those are not always the same thing. Familiarity can be deceptive. If chaos was familiar, peace may feel strange. If emotional distance was familiar, consistency may feel boring. If you spent years earning love, someone who loves you freely may feel almost uncomfortable. This is why old impressions can guide us in both directions. Some lead toward growth, others lead back into repetition. The task is to recognize which is which. This is where awareness becomes more important than fascination. You can ask, does this longing make me more alive or more trapped? Does this attraction make me more conscious or more dependent? Does this feeling bring peace or does it keep reopening the same wound? These questions help you distinguish between a meaningful impression and a pattern that needs healing, because even if the samskara is old, you are not required to obey it. This is one of the most powerful ideas in Vedic-inspired thought. The impression can be strong, but awareness creates space. The old pattern says, run. Awareness says, why? The old pattern says, chase. Awareness says, is this healthy? The old pattern says, you belong somewhere else. Awareness asks, what do I need to build here? That pause changes everything, because the samskara is no longer invisible. Once you see it, you can relate to it differently. And that means the past, however you understand the past, no longer gets the final word. This is where karma and samskara begin to meet. A samskara is the impression. Karma is what happens when that impression becomes action and consequence. Suppose you carry a deep fear of being abandoned. The fear creates a tendency. You cling. The other person feels pressured. They withdraw. Now the original fear becomes stronger. The impression produces action. The action produces consequence. The consequence reinforces the impression. The cycle continues. This is why awareness matters so much. If you see the pattern early enough, you can interrupt it. You still feel the fear, but you do not automatically chase. You communicate clearly. You give space. You remain grounded. Now the impression receives a new response. This is how old patterns begin to weaken. This is also why unexplained longing can become useful. It shows you where the emotional charge is strongest. Perhaps you cannot explain why a certain kind of loss affects you so deeply. Fine. You do not need the complete history. You can still ask what the pattern needs now. Maybe safety, maybe grief, maybe acceptance, maybe release. This is more practical than endlessly searching for proof. There is another beautiful possibility. Not every samskara is painful. Some impressions may feel like gifts, a natural attraction toward meditation, a deep love of certain sacred sounds, a sense of peace around rivers or mountains, a compassion that seems to arise effortlessly, a talent or discipline that feels strangely familiar. Again, many explanations are possible. Practice, temperament, environment, memory, or, within rebirth traditions, perhaps older impressions. But the important question is not where the gift came from. It is what you do with it. If you feel naturally drawn toward contemplation, deepen it. If you love sacred study, study. If service feels natural, serve. A positive impression becomes meaningful when it is embodied. This helps prevent spiritual curiosity from turning into ego. It is easy to say, maybe I was someone important before, but that does not make you wiser now. The only thing that matters is what you cultivate in this life. Perhaps you carried discipline, then practice discipline. Perhaps compassion, then become compassionate. The story is secondary. The quality is primary. This is an important golden lesson. People often want the past because the past feels mysterious, but the present is where the impression proves its value. This is also why some unexplained longings may never be completely resolved. You may always feel strangely drawn toward a certain landscape. You may never know why. That is okay. Not every question needs a final answer. Sometimes the purpose of the mystery is simply to make you more attentive. You notice, you reflect, you ask what the feeling reveals. That can be enough. There is a danger in trying too hard to recover hidden stories. The mind is creative. Expectation can shape memory. Imagination can become vivid enough to feel real, so humility matters. A powerful image, dream, or emotional reaction should not automatically become historical fact. You can hold it gently. You can say, "This feels important." You do not have to say, "This proves exactly what happened." That distinction keeps spiritual exploration healthy. It allows mystery without turning mystery into certainty. And perhaps that is actually closer to wisdom, because the deepest spiritual questions are not always solved by knowing more details. Sometimes they are solved by living better. This is why samskaras should always bring you back to practice. If a certain longing keeps returning, ask what habit it creates. If you constantly feel drawn toward escape, perhaps the samskara needs grounding. If you constantly fear closeness, perhaps the samskara needs trust. If you constantly seek approval, perhaps it needs self-respect. Now the longing becomes a teacher. It says, "Here is the pattern." Then life asks, "What will you do with it?" This is far more powerful than simply asking where the pattern came from, because origin can explain, but response transforms. There is another layer here. Sometimes a samskara becomes so familiar that we mistake it for identity. You say, "This is just who I am," but perhaps it is only something you have repeated for a long time. "I am always afraid. I always leave first. I always end up alone. I cannot trust people." These statements may feel like identity, but they may actually be patterns, and patterns can change. This is one of the most hopeful ideas in the chapter. You are not every impression you carry. You are also the awareness capable of seeing the impression. That means there is distance between you and the pattern, and where there is distance, there is possibility. The old feeling can rise without becoming the whole truth. You can say, "I feel abandoned," without saying, "I am abandoned." You can say, "I feel as though I belong elsewhere," without saying, "I do not belong here." This difference may seem small. It is enormous. The first sentence observes the feeling. The second becomes the feeling. Observation creates freedom. This is why unexplained longing can actually become a spiritual practice. You do not need to fight it. You do not need to worship it. You watch it. You ask what it reveals. Then you choose consciously. Perhaps the longing says, "Go backward." Wisdom asks, What can I bring forward? That question may be the most important one in the chapter. Because even if an impression truly comes from something older, your purpose is not necessarily to recreate the old life. It may be to complete the lesson differently. Maybe you once learned devotion. Bring devotion forward. Maybe you once experienced loss. Bring wisdom forward. Maybe you once knew belonging. Build belonging now. This is how the past becomes useful without becoming a prison. And perhaps this is the fifth golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing. Sometimes the story disappears because the story is not what you need anymore. Maybe what survives is only the part that still matters, the feeling, the lesson, the tendency, the unfinished movement. So if you carry a longing you cannot explain, do not panic because you cannot remember its beginning. You may never recover the whole story. You may not need to. Ask instead, what does this longing repeatedly make me feel? Choose, fear, or seek? Because that is where the samskara becomes visible, and once it becomes visible, you are no longer only carrying it unconsciously. You can work with it. You can soften what needs healing, strengthen what deserves to remain. And perhaps that is why the story faded while the impression stayed. Not so you would spend this life obsessively searching backward, but so that one old feeling could eventually lead you toward a wiser choice now. Chapter 6. Why the life you imagine may be showing you the life you need to build. By now, a deeper pattern should be becoming clear. Sometimes the life you keep imagining is not calling you backward. It is showing you what is missing now. Maybe you constantly picture a quiet home beside a river, a simple life surrounded by trees, a sacred place where the mornings are slow and the nights are peaceful. Perhaps you feel drawn toward an old way of living that seems calmer, deeper, and more meaningful than your present routine. And every time you imagine it, the same thought appears. That feels more like me. This is where unexplained longing becomes something powerful. Because perhaps the image is not only about another place, another time, or another life. Perhaps it is a map of the qualities your present life needs. If you keep imagining silence, maybe your life contains too much noise. If you keep imagining nature, maybe you have become disconnected from the natural world. If you keep imagining a close community, perhaps you are surrounded by people but still feel alone. If you keep imagining a sacred life, perhaps you have become busy enough to forget what gives your life meaning. The imagined world may be revealing what your waking world has stopped giving you. This does not make the longing ordinary, it makes it useful. Imagine someone who constantly feels emotional when seeing an ancient riverside temple. They may wonder whether they once lived in such a place, and within a rebirth framework, they may choose to hold that possibility. But another question is just as important. Why does that scene create such peace? Perhaps it represents a rhythm of life that feels deeply right to them. A slower morning, time for reflection, connection with nature, a sense that life is more than work, money, and constant activity. Now the longing becomes instruction. You may never live beside that exact river, but you can bring more of what the river represents into your life. You can create quiet mornings, spend time outside, reduce unnecessary noise, protect moments of stillness, build rituals that remind you that your life has depth. This is where a longing stops being fantasy and becomes direction. And this is important because many people make one mistake with unexplained longing. They use it to reject their present life instead of improving it. They think, I was born in the wrong time. I belong somewhere else. My real life is not here. But what if the present life is exactly where the longing is supposed to be used? What if you were not given the feeling so that you could spend decades wishing to escape? What if the feeling exists to remind you what you need to build? That changes everything. You stop asking, how do I return? And begin asking, how do I bring this forward? This is a much more powerful spiritual question. Perhaps you feel that your soul remembers simplicity, then simplify. Perhaps you feel drawn towards sacredness. Create sacred space. Perhaps you long for deeper relationships. Become more present with people. Perhaps you feel that another life was closer to nature. Then stop treating nature as something you visit only when everything else is finished. Make it part of the life you actually live. This is where longing becomes responsibility, because once you understand what the feeling points toward, you can no longer pretend you have no choice. You may not control every circumstance, but you can change small things, and small changes repeated become a different way of living. This connects beautifully with samskaras. If old impressions can shape what you are drawn toward, then new actions can also create new impressions. Suppose you keep longing for peace. You cannot immediately rebuild your entire life, but you can begin practicing peace. 10 quiet minutes in the morning, a walk without your phone, one evening without constant stimulation, a more peaceful corner in your home. Over time, these choices become part of you. You are no longer only missing peace, you are practicing it. That is a major shift. The same applies to belonging. If your unexplained longing feels like homesickness, maybe you need to ask where you can create more home. Home is not only a building. Home can be a relationship where you feel safe, a daily ritual, a place where your mind becomes quiet, a group of people who know you honestly. Perhaps the soul's unexplained longing is not asking for one forgotten address. Perhaps it is asking you to learn how to create belonging wherever you stand. That is much more powerful than waiting for a lost place to return. There is also another danger. Imagining a perfect life can become a way of avoiding the difficult work of building a meaningful one. It is easy to imagine a peaceful ancient village. It is harder to create peace inside a modern life. It is easy to dream of deep community. It is harder to become vulnerable enough to build one. It is easy to say you want a simple life. It is harder to release habits, possessions, commitments, and relationships that keep your life complicated. This is where longing must become action. Otherwise, the imagined life remains beautiful precisely because it asks nothing from you. A real life asks for choices. This is why the 6th chapter is a turning point. The question is no longer, what might I remember? It is, what am I willing to create? Perhaps the life you imagine contains courage. Then practice courage now. Perhaps it contains devotion. Practice devotion now. Perhaps it contains love that feels deep and steady. Become someone capable of giving and receiving that kind of love now. This is how longing becomes transformation. You stop waiting for another world to rescue you. You begin changing this one, and something interesting may happen when you do. The longing may soften, not disappear, but soften, because the qualities you were missing are no longer completely absent. The river you imagined is still somewhere in your mind, but now your mornings are quieter. The village is still imagined, but now you have deeper relationships. The sacred atmosphere is still beautiful, but now you have created your own moments of reverence. You begin realizing that perhaps what you wanted was never the exact place. You wanted the feeling, and now part of that feeling exists here. This can be deeply healing, because longing often becomes painful when it convinces you that what you need is impossible to reach. But if the longing represents values, then those values can be practiced. You may not be able to return to another century, but you can live less hurriedly. You may not know whether you once belonged to a particular tradition or place, but you can honor the qualities that move you. This is where the mystery becomes generous. It stops saying, "You lost something forever," and begins saying, "Here is something worth recovering in a new form." That may be the real purpose of unexplained longing, not to make you mourn an unknown life, to make you recognize what your current life is asking for. This is especially powerful when you realize that the imagined life may contain not only what you want, but what you are becoming. You picture yourself calmer, more grounded, closer to nature, more devoted, less distracted. Maybe that image is not only nostalgia, maybe it is aspiration. A future self can sometimes feel like a remembered self because both are outside the present moment. This is a fascinating possibility. You may think, I miss who I was, but perhaps some part of you is actually saying, this is who I want to become. That changes the direction completely. The longing no longer points behind you, it points ahead. This may explain why certain images feel so powerful. They are not only emotionally familiar, they represent possibility, a quieter life, a more meaningful one, a more truthful one. The image affects you because it reveals a version of existence that feels closer to your values. This is why your reaction can be so intense. You are not merely seeing a beautiful scene, you are recognizing a life you want. And perhaps the sadness comes from the distance between that life and the one you currently live. That distance is not a punishment. It is information. Now you know where change is needed. This is where Dharma becomes important again. You do not need to recreate an ancient world to live according to timeless principles. You can live with greater truth now, greater discipline, greater compassion, greater simplicity, greater awareness. The outer world may be different. The inner values can still be lived. This is how ancient wisdom survives. Not by copying every old form, by carrying forward what remains essential. Perhaps your unexplained longing is doing the same thing. It preserves a quality, not necessarily a complete biography. And now the quality is asking for expression. Maybe the longing for another life is really a longing for deeper presence. Maybe the longing for another place is a longing for peace. Maybe the longing for another time is a longing for meaning. Once you see this, the question becomes beautifully simple. What would your life look like if you honored that longing without becoming trapped inside it? Maybe you wake earlier and create silence. Maybe you spend more time in nature. Maybe you stop filling every empty moment with distraction. Maybe you give more attention to relationships that feel real. Maybe you build something with your hands. Maybe you make your home more peaceful. The exact choice does not matter as much as the principle. Bring the quality forward. Do not wait for the entire lost world to return. This is why the sixth golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing may be the most practical one yet. Perhaps you do not need to return to the life you miss. Perhaps you need to bring what you miss about that life into this one. That is where longing stops becoming sorrow. It becomes guidance. And perhaps one day you will look around at the life you have built and notice something unexpected. The peace you thought belonged somewhere else has begun appearing here. The sacredness you thought belonged to another age now exists in your mornings. The feeling of home you kept searching for has begun forming around the way you live. And maybe that is when you finally understand. The longing was never only asking you to remember. It was asking you to create. Chapter 7. Maybe you were never meant to go back, only to remember what matters. There comes a moment in unexplained longing when the question changes completely. At first, you want to know where the feeling came from. You want to know whether the place was real, whether the person existed, whether the time you miss belongs to another life, and whether some hidden memory is still moving beneath the surface of your present mind. But eventually, another question becomes more important. What if you were never meant to go back? What if the longing did not survive, so that you could spend this life searching for an old world? What if it survived because something from that old feeling still matters now? Maybe peace, maybe devotion, maybe belonging, maybe courage, maybe the ability to love without fear, maybe the reminder that life can be lived more slowly, more truthfully, and with more awareness than the way you are living it today. This is where the entire journey of the soul's unexplained longing begins to come together. You may have started with a mysterious ache for a place you have never seen. Then perhaps you discovered that the place represented something: silence, home, nature, sacredness. You may have felt drawn toward another era and wondered whether you once belonged there. Then perhaps you noticed that what you actually missed was not the century itself, but the qualities you associate with it. A slower rhythm, deeper relationships, more meaning. You may have felt as though someone was missing from your life, even though you could not remember who. Then perhaps you realized that the unknown person represented a kind of connection your heart still wants to experience. And by the time you reached the idea of samskaras, another possibility became clear. Maybe consciousness does not always preserve the whole story. Maybe sometimes only the impression remains. But if that is true, perhaps the impression is not asking you to reconstruct every forgotten detail. Perhaps it is asking you to live differently. This is the turning point, because there is a danger in becoming too attached to the mystery. The mystery can become more interesting than your actual life. You begin searching for lost places instead of creating belonging. You wonder about forgotten relationships instead of strengthening the relationships in front of you. You romanticize a distant era while allowing your present days to become empty. You keep asking, "Who was I?" and slowly stop asking, "Who am I becoming?" That is when spiritual curiosity becomes escape. And that is not the purpose. Within Vedic-inspired wisdom, the present matters because the present is where action happens. This is where you choose. This is where habits are created. This is where attachments are strengthened or loosened. This is where karma continues through what you do now. Whatever came before, this is the life in which the next response is being written. That is why the past, whether remembered or not, should not become your prison. Even if you believe you once belonged somewhere else, you are here now. Even if you believe you once loved someone deeply, the relationships you are responsible for are here now. Even if you feel that your soul remembers a quieter, more sacred world, your task is not to disappear into that memory. Your task may be to bring something from that feeling into the world around you. This is the difference between nostalgia and wisdom. Nostalgia says, "I wish I could return." Wisdom asks, what is worth carrying forward? Perhaps the old feeling carries patience, then practice patience. Perhaps it carries reverence, then create moments of reverence. Perhaps it carries simplicity, then remove what is unnecessary. Perhaps it carries deep connection, then become more honest in your relationships. Perhaps it carries courage, then stop postponing the decision you already know you need to make. This is where unexplained longing stops being something that merely happens to you. It becomes a responsibility. Because once you understand the quality beneath the longing, you can no longer say that the only answer exists somewhere unreachable. Maybe the exact place is unreachable. The quality is not. You may never find the river you imagine, but you can create more stillness. You may never identify the person your heart seems to miss, but you can learn to love with greater presence. You may never discover whether another lifetime is behind the feeling, but you can allow the feeling to make this lifetime more conscious. This may be why the memory is incomplete. Think about that carefully. If you remembered every detail of another life with perfect clarity, perhaps you would become attached to it. You might spend your present life comparing everything with what came before. You might look at every relationship through an old identity. You might refuse the new because you were too loyal to the old. Perhaps forgetting has its own wisdom. You forget the name, the house, the road, the face. But maybe something essential remains. The lesson, the tendency, the value, the unfinished movement. If so, perhaps the purpose is not recovery of information. It is continuation of growth. This is a much deeper way to understand unexplained longing. The longing may not be saying, "Find the past." It may be saying, "Do not forget what matters." That changes the emotional weight completely. Suppose you have always felt homesick for a simple life in nature. Instead of spending years grieving a life you cannot prove existed, ask what the image teaches you about your values. Maybe you need less noise. Maybe your body needs more time outside. Maybe your mind is exhausted by constant stimulation. Now you can respond. The longing has done its work. It showed you what your life needs. The same is true if you feel strangely connected to an ancient spiritual world. Perhaps you do not need to recreate every outer form. You can still cultivate silence, discipline, study, devotion, compassion. Those qualities are not trapped in the past. They can be lived anywhere. This is how timeless wisdom works. Its outer forms change. Its inner principles survive. Maybe unexplained longing works the same way. You are not being asked to copy the old life. You are being asked to recognize the principle hidden inside the feeling. This may also explain why some longings become stronger during major transitions. When your current identity starts changing, deeper questions rise. What actually matters to me? What kind of life do I want? What have I been doing only because other people expected it? At these moments, images of another place or another way of living can become especially powerful because they provide contrast. You see what your current life is not. The longing becomes sharper. Perhaps that does not mean you are being pulled backward. Maybe you are being pushed toward greater honesty. You thought you wanted another life. Perhaps what you really want is to stop living this one in a way that no longer feels true. This is an important distinction, because sometimes the desire to escape is actually the desire to change. The mind imagines a distant place because the necessary change feels too close and too difficult. I wish I could live somewhere else may really mean I cannot continue living like this. I wish I had been born in another era may really mean I am exhausted by the values around me. I miss someone I cannot remember may partly mean I am starving for emotional depth. Once you translate the longing, the next step becomes clearer. Now you can ask what change belongs to you. Not everything must change. You do not need to abandon your entire life because one ancient image moves you deeply. But something small may need attention. Your schedule, your relationships, your environment, your spiritual practice, your relationship with technology, your relationship with silence. One honest adjustment can sometimes satisfy part of a longing that seemed impossible to answer. This is how you bring the symbol into life. You stop worshipping the image, you embody its value. There is also a deeper lesson about identity here. Perhaps you have become attached to the idea that you are an old soul, someone who belongs somewhere else. That idea can feel beautiful, but be careful. Even spiritual identities can become prisons. If you constantly tell yourself that you do not belong in this age, you may never learn how to participate fully in it. If you believe no one understands you because your soul belongs to another time, you may stop making the effort required for real connection. The identity becomes an explanation for isolation. This is not freedom. A meaningful spiritual belief should make you more capable of living, not less. You can feel ancient without becoming absent. You can value the past without rejecting the present. You can believe in rebirth while still treating this life as precious. This balance may be one of the most important things the longing is trying to teach. This many lives exist within your spiritual worldview, then this life is not less meaningful. It is one more opportunity, one more place for awareness to deepen, one more set of relationships where you can choose differently, one more chance to turn old impressions into conscious action. The idea of rebirth should not make this life disposable. It should make action more meaningful. If patterns continue, then what you practice now matters. If impressions carry forward, then the kind of person you become matters. This returns us to samskaras. You may carry old impressions, but you are creating new ones today. Every time you choose honesty instead of avoidance, you create an impression. Every time you practice compassion instead of resentment, another pattern is strengthened. Every time you release what you cannot control, you are teaching the mind a new response. This means your future inner world is being shaped now. The past may explain some tendencies. The present creates what comes next. That is empowering. You do not have to solve the mystery before you can grow. You do not need complete memory. You need conscious response. This is why the most useful question is no longer, "Who was I?" It becomes, what is this feeling asking me to become? That question opens forward instead of backward. Maybe the longing asks you to become quieter, more courageous, more loving, less attached, more present. Maybe the old feeling is not a destination, it is a direction. This is where longing begins losing its sadness. At first you feel deprived. I lost something. Later you begin feeling guided. There is something I can live. That is a profound shift. The old home becomes a value. The unknown person becomes a lesson about connection. The ancient era becomes a reminder of simplicity. The longing transforms from absence into instruction, and once the instruction is understood, you may notice that the ache changes. You still love the image, but you no longer feel desperate to escape toward it. You can look at the river and feel peace rather than grief. You can see an ancient temple and feel inspired rather than displaced. The symbol no longer says, "You do not belong here." It says, "Remember this quality." That is integration. Perhaps this is how spiritual memory, if such memory exists, is meant to function. Not as a chain tying you to what was, as a thread connecting values across change. The forms disappear, the essence continues. That is a beautiful possibility, but even if the longing comes entirely from this lifetime, the wisdom remains the same. The feeling tells you what matters. Listen to that. You do not need to prove its origin before honoring its message. This may be one of the most liberating lessons in the entire audiobook. You can stop demanding certainty. You can say, "I do not know whether I lived there. I do not know why this time period moves me. I do not know who I feel I am missing, but I know what the feeling reveals." Maybe it reveals that you need peace. That is enough to begin. Maybe it reveals you need deeper relationships. Begin there. Maybe it reveals that your current way of living has become too far from your values. That deserves attention. Meaning does not always require historical certainty. Sometimes meaning is found through what a feeling asks of you now. This is also why you should never allow unexplained longing to make you careless with real people. Suppose you feel that someone from another life is missing. That feeling may be emotionally meaningful, but do not overlook the person beside you because they do not create the same dramatic mystery. Real love is often quieter. It is built through repeated actions, listening, showing up, repairing conflict, being reliable. The unknown can feel more magical because it has never been tested. But the present relationship is where love becomes practice. This matters. Mystery can awaken the heart. Ordinary life teaches the heart how to remain open. If a past life interpretation makes you ignore present love, something has become distorted. The same principle applies to places. Do not become so obsessed with a place you cannot find that you never care for the home you have. Create beauty where you are. Create peace. The ordinary place can become sacred through attention. Perhaps this is one of the deepest meanings of home. Home may not be somewhere consciousness once existed. Home may be a quality of presence. You create home when you stop abandoning yourself, when you live according to what matters. When the outer life and inner values become less divided, this might explain why some people travel endlessly searching for a place that feels right and still remain restless. Geography cannot solve an inner division. You can cross oceans and carry the same dissatisfaction. Sometimes the lost home is not a country, it is coherence. Your life needs to feel closer to your values. When that happens, even an ordinary room can begin feeling more like home. This is why Chapter 7 must return you firmly to the present. You have explored the mystery long enough. Now the question is what you do with it. Perhaps the longing will never disappear. That is fine. It can remain a quiet companion, but let it become a compass rather than a wound. When it rises, ask what value is calling. If you feel homesick, ask what creates belonging. If you feel drawn toward another age, ask what quality from that age you admire. If you miss an unknown person, Ask what depth of relationship your heart wants to cultivate. Then take one step. That is how longing becomes dharma. Feeling turns into action. Action turns into character. Character shapes the life. This is much more powerful than endless speculation. And perhaps one day, after years of trying to understand why you miss a life you cannot remember, you will suddenly see the answer differently. You will realize that maybe the longing was never primarily about the lost life. Maybe it was about the unlived part of this one, the peace you kept postponing, the creativity you buried, the relationships you kept shallow because vulnerability scared you, the sacredness you lost beneath busyness. Perhaps that is what was calling. This possibility is both confronting and hopeful, because you cannot recover every forgotten past, but you can still stop wasting what remains of the present. And perhaps that is the final golden truth of the soul's unexplained longing. You do not need to know where your soul has been in order to become more conscious about where your life is going. Maybe you belonged somewhere else once. Maybe you did not. The mystery can remain. What matters is that you are here, now, breathing, choosing, creating impressions, loving people, losing things, learning, changing. This is the life asking for your attention. So if a place you have never seen feels like home, honor the feeling, but come back. If another era makes your heart ache, receive the lesson, but come back. If someone unknown seems missing, listen to what the longing reveals. But come back. Come back to your body, your relationships, your choices, your present responsibilities. Because whatever the soul may carry from behind you, the doorway currently open is here. And perhaps that is the deepest reason you cannot fully remember the life you miss. Maybe you were never supposed to rebuild it exactly. Maybe you were only meant to carry one precious thing forward, one truth, one lesson, one quality of love, one way of seeing life. And once you recognize what that is, the longing has completed its most important work. You no longer need to ask endlessly, how do I get back? You can ask something far more powerful. How do I live what I have remembered? Because perhaps your soul's unexplained longing was never a call to return to yesterday. Perhaps it was a quiet invitation to stop postponing the person you are meant to become today.